Hi everyone, today I'll be talking about 8 different cognitive distortions, which are basically biases in the way that we think about life that can contribute to low mood as well as depression, as well as what are some evidence-based strategies that you can use to be able to target them. For those of you who don't know, my name is Parky. I'm a postdoctoral fellow in clinical psychology at Stanford University, and I've been studying and practicing evidence-based mental health for the better part of a decade. Love to share some of that information with you. So the first cognitive distortion that we'll talk about is mind reading. So mind reading, as the name suggests, is that essentially you're making constant negative predictions about what other people are thinking about you. Let's say you're at a party, you're having a good time, you're spending time talking with somebody, and it seems like it's a good conversation. But then suddenly you're thinking, what if this person actually doesn't really like me at all? What if this person thinks I'm lame and boring, and they're really only talking to me because they're being polite and they think I have serial killer vibes, so that's why they don't want to stop talking to me. So in this case, if I were to have these thoughts, I would probably feel more anxious, more depressed, and I probably want to withdraw from the conversation, even though I actually have no idea what this person was thinking about me. So a second cognitive distortion is catastrophizing. And what catastrophizing really is that you're essentially taking the worst case scenario. You're thinking, well, if I make a mistake at work, then my boss is gonna find out, they're gonna fire me, and then I'm gonna lose my job, I'm gonna lose my home, and then all of a sudden my life is ruined. So you can kind of see that the mind went a mile a minute, where a mistake at work went all the way to life being ruined in the matter of moments. And usually catastrophizing is really kind of thinking this sort of worst case scenario in many different situations. Like if you make a mistake at school, you're never going to get into the program of your dreams. Or if you make a random mistake with your partner, they're going to break up with you and you're going to be alone forever. So it's really easy to go from something pretty small to something pretty catastrophic in a pretty short amount of time. So the third cognitive distortion is something called discounting the positives, where essentially you are having this sort of negative filter where anything negative can pass through pretty easily, but anything good that happens gets bounced off. So for example, let's say you've been doing really well at a number of different things, like you're doing well in school, you're doing well in your volunteer activities, you're having great relationships, but you got like a C- on your history exam, and all of a sudden you're feeling really, really terrible because that's the only thing you focus on. Like you discount everything else as like good luck or just good fortune, it wasn't really you, but the one thing that didn't go so well, you focus entirely on is the only thing that you account for, and everything else gets discounted. So the fourth cognitive distortion is fortune telling, and it's kind of like catastrophizing, where essentially you're making predictions, usually negative, about the things in your life. Like you think, if I were to apply for that program, I'm probably not going to get it. If I were to apply for that job, I'm probably not going to get it. If I ask that person out, they're going to say no, and they're going to laugh at my face, and I'll be shunned for the rest of my life. So you're constantly making predictions about your life, and as a result, if you believe in those predictions, you're never going to want to try anything out because you think it's going to be negative anyway. So the fifth cognitive distortion is something called all or nothing thinking, or black and white thinking, where essentially we're constantly living in the extremes. We're either an amazing student or we're a terrible student. We're either a worthy person or a worthless person. So we never live in the sort of the shades of gray. It's always one or the other, which of course creates a lot of volatility in the way we feel. We're constantly either feeling good or terrible, or good or terrible, and then that creates a lot of distress internally and a lack of consistency in our day-to-day. So a sixth cognitive distortion is something called personalizing. And personalizing essentially is that you're taking external events and you're putting the blame or the responsibility onto yourself, especially the negative outcomes. Like for example, let's say you're part of a team, you're doing a group presentation and your group doesn't do so well, you would say, oh, it was my fault, I'm to blame for what happened. Or, if you're having a conversation with somebody and the conversation's kind of dry and it's a little bit awkward, you'd probably be likely to say, it's probably my fault that this is such an awkward conversation. That's personalizing. So a seventh cognitive distortion is probability overestimation, where you're essentially constantly overestimating the likelihood that something negative is going to happen. Like if I were to take that walk, the probability of me actually feeling good is pretty low. It's very likely that I'm actually going to feel terrible from it, or that if I go to that party, I'm not going to enjoy it, or even if I did ask that person out, they're very unlikely to say yes. So you're kind of overestimating or underestimating towards in favor of the negative. So the eighth and final cognitive distortion I'll talk about today is emotional reasoning. And the way that I think about emotional reasoning, otherwise known as following a feeling, is how you feel affects how you think. So if I feel depressed, that means I must be depressed. If I feel like a bad friend, I must be a bad friend. If I feel a certain way, it must be true and I have to follow it. And this is a problem in the context of depression because depression makes us feel unmotivated, it makes us feel low. And when we feel low, it tells us not to do anything. We're not going to go outside, we're going to stay at home. But the problem with that is that the cycle of depression then gets stronger, where if we stop doing things that are enjoyable to us, then we stop having things that are reinforcing, and then we feel even worse, and then we stop doing even more, and then we feel even worse, and so on and so forth, until you're kind of in the depression hole. So now let's talk about some evidence-based strategies that you can use to be able to target some of these cognitive distortions. So the first one is checking the facts, where essentially checking the facts says, well, I have these cognitive distortions, these like really scary negative thoughts, but I don't really know if they're grounded in reality. Like if I have a thought, I'm a terrible student, is that necessarily grounded in the facts of the situation? Well, I mean, I didn't do so well on my history exam, I only got like 60% on it, or I've been missing some classes, but I have been doing well in other classes, and I've been doing well in my research and volunteering, so it's not necessarily true that I'm just a terrible student. There are some things I need to work on, I want to honor and validate that, but there's also a lot of things I'm doing really well in. And by checking the facts, our brain doesn't have to smell the BS when you're just using a very positive statement. It's being able to kind of ground yourself in reality, in the facts, that the brain can be satisfied. So you want to really have concrete facts that your brain can hold on to when you're checking the facts. So another strategy that you can use is the principle of letting go. So sometimes when we have a thought, we feel like it's such an important thought, we have to follow it, there's something significant and meaningful about it, but in reality, it could just be another random thought that you had amongst the thousands or millions of other thoughts you have on a day-to-day, but we just happen to take significance and salience into that particular one. So you can even practice letting the thought go, and you can do so by verbalizing it and say, I notice I had a thought right now, instead of saying, oh, I had this thought, therefore it must be really important. Or you can kind of visualize its disappearance, kind of treat it like a leaf on a stream or a cloud in the sky, and again, just kind of allowing it to let go. So a third strategy you can use is the best friend technique, where essentially we tend to be our own worst critics, but pretty kind towards other people. So you might ask yourself, if this was my friend or someone I really cared about in the same situation with the same thought, what would I say to them? And usually you're able to come up with some really nice thoughts that you can now take for yourself and hopefully give yourself a little bit of compassion and reduce some of like the anxiety and shame associated with the thought. And a fourth and final strategy I'll talk about today is that we can sometimes engage in a certain behavior even when we think a certain way. Like even if we're feeling really crappy, we don't want to go out. The thing about humans is that we can still go out anyway. And sometimes just the same as thoughts can influence our behaviors can also influence our thoughts. So by engaging in behaviors that we know are going to be helpful for improving mood, we can sort of change the way that we think, change the way that we feel, even if we initially don't feel that way, through engaging in a new behavior. And that's it. I hope this video was helpful to start identifying some of these cognitive distortions in your life and some strategies that might be helpful to target them. If you found this video helpful, I encourage you to subscribe because I'll be continuing to talk more about evidence-based treatments of mental health down the road. Take care.